joins, but it'll be not too late if he joins. But today's daf is daf mem, or daf 40 in Nedarim, and we, what did we get? We got to the last line, I think.
Yeah.
Daf Lamed Bet. The last line, very good. So we are still discussing this issue in our Mishnah, which happens to be a fascinating issue, where you were mudar hana'ah, you can't get benefit from someone else. Can you go visit them if they're sick, right? And so the premise, which I said it yesterday, but I didn't emphasize it, I think, enough, is that if a person goes to visit another sick person, there's one assumption, good evening, James, that you're doing them a favor, right? It's helpful for the person. As we said yesterday, it takes away 1/60th of their illness, maybe. But there's also it's also a mitzvah, and it's also something that happens mimela. It's not something that you give them via diet. So that's the concept that we talk about, things that happen on their own, so to speak, and things that happen directly. And so there's not always a big difference, right? So one of the things that we say happens on its own is where you take food and put it down on the ground, someone else picks it up. So you didn't give it to him, but certainly you made it that he could get it. But Bikur Cholim is not considered to be giving him a gift. So if he's Asur Ba'ana'ah, you're allowed to do it unless they pay you for Bikur Cholim. And if they pay you, then it's a problem, because then by not making him pay, you're essentially giving him his copay back or something, And so that's considered to be a gift. So that's the Mishnah. Today we continue sort of the Agarata of Bikur Cholim with the bottom line in Daf Lamed Tet Amud Bet. Rav Chelbo Chalash. Rav Chelbo got weak. He became sick. He took to his bed, as they used to say, right? So Nafik, the Achers Rav Kahana, so Rav Kahana, I guess, was his friend. I don't exactly know their relationship. Rav Kahana went out to the street, to the store, to the shul maybe, and he announced, Rav Chelbo Ba'ish. Rav Chelbo is weak. Ba'ish is Aramaic for weak. It's a good word. Rav Chelbo is sick. But no one came to visit. I don't know why. Again, there's no context given in the Rishonim. Lo ika de ka'ati. No one came to visit him. So I don't know. Maybe everyone was very busy. It was Sunday. People had to watch football. No one came to visit Rav Chelbo, unfortunately. Amar lahu. So Rav Kahana said to the students or to the people, "You're wrong for not going. Lo kacha yama aseh. Don't you remember the famous story? B'Talmud echad b'Talmidei Rabbi Akiva." We're on the top of Daf Mem. We're on the third line. That the story was Rav Chelbo got sick. Rav Kahana made an announcement in the Beit Midrash. Rav Chelbo is sick, and no one went to visit him. It's like when they call for a Shiva minyan and no one shows up, or no one comes from there, right? So Rav Chelbo then said, Rav Kahana said, "Don't you remember the story of Rabbi Akiva? There was Ma'aseh Talmid Achad Talmidei Rabbi Akiva shechala. He got sick. He came down with the illness." Third line from the top. Lo nichnesu chacham nevakro. Nobody wanted to visit him. Again, I don't know if it's because they were afraid of getting sick from him. Right? He might be contagious. You could see why people would want to avoid a sick person. We certainly have all been there, right? Or it was uncomfortable, or they just didn't feel like doing it. No one went to visit him. Nichnas Rabbi Akiva levakro. So Rabbi Akiva went to visit him himself. And because the student was so energized by the fact that Rabbi Akiva had been honored him and accompanied him and treated him, he got better, which you could see, he could rise to the occasion. So he was so inspired by Rabbi Akiva that he jumped out of bed and he was healed. Amar lei, so the student said to Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi hichitani. Rabbi, you gave me my life back. You brought me back to life because you visited me. Yatsa Rabbi Akiva b'darash. Rabbi Akiva went out based on that episode or on that event. He got up and showed that Shabbos and he said, "Kol mi she'ein mevaker cholim." Anyone who doesn't go to visit sick people, kilo shofich damim. It's as if you're killing them, because the flip, right? I went to visit this sick student and I gave him life. If I hadn't gone, he would have gotten worse. He might have died. Maybe it's not literally shofich damim, but you're taking away some of their health. So if you neglect to visit them, it's a bad thing. And so you should go visit Reb Chelbo. That's what he said. Ki ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came to Eretz Yisrael, he told us stories. Amar, he said, Kol mevaker et hacholim gorim lo sheyichya. anyone who visits a sick person as a bikur cholim will cause that person to live or to feel better or to have more energy. It's a good thing to visit the sick. Kol she'eino mivaker at cholim, but if you don't visit them, gorim lo sheyamut, you're going to cause for them to die. Listen, one second. It's one thing to say that it's not a nice thing not to go, but what do you mean you're going to cause them to die by not going, right? I don't understand, says the Gemara. My grandma, right? What do you mean you're causing them to die? What is he saying? Because if you go visit a sick person, then you're vacation of rachamim, sheyichya, right? If you go visit a sick person, you see that they're suffering, that things are bad. You daven that much harder to God to help them, and that helps bring them back to life. But then what's the flip side of that? What are you doing? You're asking God to kill them? Right? It's the equivalent to asking God to kill them. Says no, what we mean is that if you don't visit a sick person, you won't end up asking Hashem to help them because you don't know about their situation, right? You hear someone's not well or you hear whatever, but when you see it in person, and I could, obviously everyone knows this is true, right? Sometimes you don't really understand what someone's going through until you see them in that situation, and that inspires you or drives you to ask God to have compassion. So if you don't visit them, you're not going to ask Rachamim, lo sheyachya, lo sheyamut, not that they should live and not that they should die.
Are we saying that is this something that one should do, or is this saying that because there actually is healing power, you know what I mean? Is it just sort of like good practice, or is the Gemara, because we did say something about 1/60th, or like the previous stuff,
right?
That there's actually medicinal value, so to speak.
I mean, it's a hard question to answer from a Western term, right? Because you're thinking of medicine as being something that does something.
Well, right? It sounds like they're saying it does something.
Well, but I think there's no question that the spirits that a person's in when they're sick has an impact, right? But the question is, how do you measure that? How do you quantify that, right? So there's benefit. We all know Patch Adams, right? You have a clown in the hospital. It means something. It really does. But is that Echad Mishishim? Maybe, I don't know. But like that's the like the story of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva came to visit his student who was very sick, and that had a tremendous effect on the student. You could relate to that. You can imagine.
But it sounds like it's really they actually are saying that is, I mean, back then there wasn't a lot of medicine, right?
So what you're saying is a big debate, to be honest with you. The Rishonim do talk about this to something. I don't know all of them, but I'll rephrase it. Because this Gemara makes it sound like it's not necessarily going to visit and raising their spirits. Right. It makes it sound like you're going to visit, you see what sad situation they're in, and then you pray for them.
And that will have benefit.
And then it has benefit. So this Gemara makes it sound like it's the prayer that matters, but it's hard to pray for someone if you heard someone sick, but if you actually see them, then you're going to pray for them more. So this Gemara makes it sound like that. There's other Gemaras, and even before, where it makes it sound like it's you're mishamesh them, or you actually go, we're going to see in a second, you go and you wash them, and you clothe them, and you feed them, and that's the other thing, Bikur Cholim in a place where you didn't have organized hospitals might have meant that no one's, right, when someone is not being taken care of, Bikur Cholim is being a nurse to that person, right? It's not just waving from the door, right? Right. So all these things are part of it. The question, I don't know if they're exclusive of each other, but they're all part of it.
I have two things. I heard Patch Adams, the real Patch Adams, speak many years ago. He gave the commencement address at University of Connecticut School of Medicine.
Okay.
I was there. And second, in terms of the efficacy of prayer, there was a famous study done in the 1980s. There was a randomized study of intercessory prayer at San Francisco General Hospital, and the people that got prayed for had somewhat better outcomes than people who didn't get prayed for.
Yeah, but I'm sure that there's other factors involved with that. I mean,
it was a randomized clinical trial,
I can't
double-blinded,
okay.
And we're
not going to argue with the ethics or that study. So
I actually give that example to students to critique.
All right.
But Arkhamar seems to agree with this study. So continues to work at the start, right? Rava got sick. Unfortunately, it happens probably to most people. But the first day that Rabbi got sick, Yuma Kadma Techalash, the first day that he got sick, Amar Lahon, he told his attendants or his students, Lo Tagilu Le'inish. I don't want you to tell anybody that I'm sick. I want you to keep it secret. Some people do this, right? The lo litra mazle. I don't want my mazel to get bad luck. Meaning, this is how Lisa the Ron understands it, that he wasn't sure if he was really sick. In the beginning, sometimes you can't tell. You feel sick, but maybe it'll pass. So he didn't want to get typed as a sick person. Once they put up the sign that so-and-so is sick, you're a sick person. So he didn't want anyone to know in the beginning. He was hoping it would pass. But Mikan ve'elech, once he went on and he saw he wasn't getting better, I don't exactly know what was wrong with him, obviously, but he wasn't getting better. He was quite sick. So Amar Lahon, so he said to his attendants, Puku v'achrizu b'shuka, go and announce it in public, put it in the newspaper. To call the Sanile, everybody who hates me, Rava had his own long list of enemies, right? So Rava said, anyone who hates me, lichdili, they're gonna be celebrating. You got it. When they hear that I'm sick, says Rava, they're all going to be very happy. And of course, the pasuk says in Mishlei, Chtiv, Rava has a pasuk here too, which is great. Binfol oivecha al tismach, and since Rava is the end of the pasuk, I can read it. Binfol oivecha al tismach, when your enemy is falling, don't rejoice. Ubikashlo al yigali becha, and when they fail, don't let your heart be happy. Pen yireh Hashem, it's because God might see the rabbe enough, and God will hate it. And God will reverse it. So basically, Rava was saying, look, if everyone's happy that I'm sick, God's going to get angry and going to make me better, right? So that's why Rav wanted everyone to know. And the people who like me, the rachamim li, the ones who like me will actually daven for me. And so that's why Rava wanted to tell everybody this story. Amar Rav, says Rav, another detail about Bikur Cholim, Kol mevaker tacholeh nitzol midino shel Gehenom. Anyone who visits the sick people is saved from the din of Gehenom. It's a lot of Gehenom for one Masechet, right? Shenemar, because the pasuk says, it's a pasuk that we quote at different times. Ashrei maskil el dal b'yom ra'ah yimalteu Hashem. Blessed is the one who's the dal. We'll see what the dal is in a second. The poor one. On the day of evil, God will save that person. Who's the dal? Ein dal ela choleh. A dal refers literally to a poor person, but here it means a person who's unhealthy, right? Who's sick. So Nemar midle yivtze'eni. It's a pasuk in Shayo that from Dala, from the poor, from being sick, God should take me out. Inami minadeinkar from a pasuk in Shmuel where he says Madua ata kacha dal ben hamelech baboker baboker. Right, the pasuk where he talks about why do you look sad? Why do you look sick every morning in front of the king? So dal means you're sick. And ein ra'ah el Gehenom, of course, ra'ah, evil, refers to Gehenom. Shenemar kol pa'al Hashem lemaneu, right? V'gam rasha liyom ra'ah, that all the actions that a person does, Hashem punishes you or holds you accountable, and a rasha for the day of ra'ah, which is the day of Gehenom, the day of judgment. So if you visit the sick person, you're saved from Gehenom. V'im bikar ma'scharo, and if you do visit them, what's your reward? So, what's your reward? We just told you. You get saved from Gehenom, right? Mascharo k'da'amar, we just said, nitzol midina shel Gehenom. Yeah, that's your reward in the world to come. But what do you get in this world? Mascharo ba'olam hazeh, the reward for visiting the sick is Hashem yishmereyu, continuation of the pasuk. God will watch you, v'yichayeyu, and will keep you alive, v'osher ba'aretz, and give you riches and plenty in the land, v'al titzneu b'nefesh oivav, and not put you in the hearts of your enemies. And now we darshan each word. Hashem yishmereo, God will protect you, yetzer hara, from evil. Yichayeyo, and God will keep you alive. That's keeping you alive minag yisurim, that you won't have, physical ailments. The osher ba'aretz, you'll be rich in the land. Shiyah kol mitchabdimbo, everyone will be honored you, will respect you. You get a lot of cover. And you won't be given to the nefesh of your enemies, you will have friends like Naaman. Do you remember the story of Naaman? People can correct me, especially if they learned Melachim recently. Naaman was the king, right? He came to be cured of his tzara'at from Elisha, right? And Elisha said, okay, all you got to do is jump into the Jordan, right? He said more than that, but that was the gist of it. And Naaman said, "That's terrible. I don't want to do that. I wanted, I came for the fancy medicine. I didn't come for the old wives' tales." And his friends all said to him, "Look, you came all the way. You might as well do it. What's the big deal? Just jump into the water." And he did it, and he got better. So you should want to have friends like Naaman who talk you into doing the right thing. Sharibat Sarato, Re'im Avam. You shouldn't have friends like Rechavam, who was the king of Yehuda, or who became the king of Yehuda. Shechilko et Malchuto. Remember that the story of Rechavam, again, my version of the story that I recall, is that after Shlomo died, his son Rechavam was crowned as the next king. But Shlomo was not terribly popular, but Rechavam was even less popular, right? And there was, of course, I'll call him a populist politician who was waiting to get in, named Yeravam, right? And when Rechavam died, the people came to him and said, "Look, we're paying high taxes and inflation's through the roof, and we can't sustain this kind of melucha. You got to be kinder to us. You got to treat us better." And Rechavam had old advisors who were advisors from his father Shlomo, who said, "They're right. We're really working them too hard. You got to give them a break." And Rechavam's friends, the pasuk says, his own advisors, and he was a young kid, right, said to him, "No, if you give them an inch, right, they're going to take it. They're never going to respect you. You got to crack down." And so he did. He didn't give them anything. He said, "My father," I forget the words. "My father made you pay 1,000. I'm going to make you pay 10,000." Right. So, and it turns out, of course, they rebelled, and the Melucha was split, and everyone followed Yeravam because they rejected him. So you should want to have friends like Naaman, even though he was not a great person, but he had good friends, and not have friends like Rechavam. Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, while we're on the topic, since we get off topic a lot here, Im Yomru lecha yiladim b'nei uskenim sitor. If you're taking advice, and the new politicians tell you it's time to build, and the old people, I use politicians here, but obviously it could be anything, right? They told you to build. And the old people said, knock it down. So, and this is how it's understood, is that the young people are being constructive and the old people are being destructive. Still, Shema Lizgenim. You should listen to the old ones. V'al tishma yiladim, to the young ones. Shahab binyan yiladim stira. When young people think they're building, they're just rooting, you're making something that's going to be destroyed. Ustirat zekenim binyan. And when older people say to knock something down, it has the function sometimes of leading to greater building. And the Siman Davar is Rechavam ben Shlomo, in his case, the older people told him to destroy his melucha, basically, but it would have saved it. And the younger people told him to protect his melucha, but it ended up destroying it, right? So that's the symbolism there. Amar of Shisha Braid Ravidi, back to Refuah, back to Bikur Cholim. Lo lisod inish kitzira, a person should not go and visit and give someone food. Lo bitlat sha'i kamaita, lo bitlat sha'i batraita diyuma. You have it? Not in the first 3 hours of the day and not in the last 3 hours of the day. If you're going to visit a sick person, you shouldn't go in the beginning of the day or the end of the day. It's so that you don't forget about, you're not nitrashel, you're not, how do you say in English? You're not like lax in asking for racham. Why? Because tlat sha'i maita, the first 3 hours of the day, rav chadaite, people feel good. Even people who are not well, you wake up in the morning, you've had a night to rest, I guess if you had slept that night, and you feel best early in the morning, which is why doctors like to round in the morning, right? Because that's when we catch people at their best. So there, you're going to go visit the person. They'll look good. You're not going to daven for them because you feel like that's it. Is it really true?
About the doctors?
No, it's not why. Doctors round in the morning because they have other stuff to do. But
I see.
But anyways, I'll tell you other doctor stories later. But sorry. Anyway, so you don't want to go early in the morning because that's when a person's healthiest. Again, obviously, it's only true if that's the case. Like, this is not probably relevant today where in a hospital there's no morning, right? There's care 24/7 or noise 24/7, right? So anyways, you shouldn't go the first 3 hours of the day, but right in the last 3 hours of the day, takiv chulshe. Everyone understands the person's going to be very weak, and you're going to think that it's hopeless, right? They're gone. They're not going to make it. So why do I even need to daven for them? So that's like they're too sick. So you want to go in the middle of the day when when it's not so bad. It's medium sick, exactly. That's the Ran's interpretation. The Rambam actually must have a different gear. So the Rambam has some shot that you shouldn't visit for the reason that like they're being taken care of in the morning, taken care of in the evening, but no one takes care of them during the day, and that's when you need help, right? That's other meaning.
Any
Amar Rav,
comments on modern hospitals?
right? No, obviously it's a different thing. Amar Rav and Amar Rav, minayin shekadosh baruch hu zaneh tacholah. How do you know that God provides some sustenance, obviously not physical sustenance, but some sustenance to the sick? Shenemar Hashem yisadin al eretz davai, that God provides sustenance on the bed of the sick person. Amar Rav and Amar Rav, minayin shechina shruya l'mala mitato shel choleh. How do we know the very famous dictum that Rashi's gonna quote it in a few parashiyot with Yaakov in Mitzrayim? How do we know that the Shekhinah is placed, shruya, dwells on the head of the bed of those who are sick? Shenemar Hashem yisadeni al eretz davai, that God is rested on the bed of the sick person. Tainami hachi. In fact, the Braita says this lahalacha. Nichnas levaker et hacholeh. You go to visit a sick person. Most understand this is when they have beds that are on the floor, right? So the person who's sick is lying on a mat on the floor. So the Shekhinah is on that level. So lo yeshiv lo gabi mita, shouldn't sit on the bed because that's where the Shekhinah is. Lo gabi savsav lo gabi kisei, you shouldn't sit on a chair or on a stool because then you're above the level of the Shekhinah. Ela mitatef yoshiv gabi karka, you should wrap yourself with humility, and you should sit on the ground. Mipnei shashchina shruya lemala mitato shel choleh. Shenemar Hashem yisadin al eretz davai. But again, in my interpretation, which is not mine alone, of course, if the person's on a bed, you can sit on a chair equivalent to the bed, right? You just can't sit, you should sit higher than the bed. Amar Ravin, Amar Rav. Now, this has nothing to do with anything, just that's my take, but it's also Ravin Amar Rav, who we just quoted. Says Ravin Amar Rav on a very unrelated topic, but it's just a statement from Ravin Amar Rav. Mitra b'ma'arava sahada rabba prat. If you want to know about the rain in the west, the big witness, the big sahada, the big aid for that is the river Prat, the Nachal Prat, right? So these people lived in Bavel. Bavel is around, I don't know, a 2-month journey from Eretz Yisrael. I guess it could be that long. It doesn't have to be, right? But it's very far, especially if you go slowly. If you want to know, and they didn't have very good weather channel back then, if you want to know about how the weather is, what kind of winter it was in Israel, you can look at the Prat, because the Nahar Prat ultimately, not directly, of course, but ultimately the rain from the mountains of Israel is going to flow down and fill the tributaries and the aquifers that end up feeding the Nahar Prat. So although it doesn't really rain that way in Bavel, right? It's not episodic like Israel. There is a connection between the rains of Eretz Yisrael and Nahar Prat. So if you look at the river, you can know if it was a good year in Israel. Now it's probably a few months delay, of course, right? Because you can't look at it, it's not the same day, but maybe 2 or 3 months later. Okay, Charlie's not sure how this works, but that's what Ravin said in the name of Rav. Now that argues on Shmuel, because this implies, this is a very complicated Gemara, as proof by the fact the length of the Ran, if you turn the page. But this argues with Shmuel, because what Ravin is basically saying is that the level of the water of the Prat, and by default any river, is dictated by the amount of rain that falls. If a lot of rain falls, the water goes up. If not a lot of rain falls, the water goes down. That's what sounds very logical. But that argues with Shmuel. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel says, a general statement, that Nahara, that a river, mikipe mitzbarech, a river is blessed from its underground wells. That rivers do not go up based on rain. They go up based on aquifers, on underground springs. And so therefore, the rain in Israel does not impact the level of the Prat, because the Prat, no, the Gemara elsewhere says, he says for 1 amma that came from above, 2 amma come from below. But the majority of the flow of the river, at least, obviously everyone agrees when it rains, the river has a lot of water. But from a long-term standpoint, the majority of the water in the river is not rain dependent. It's based on, something deeper, which I guess ultimately aquifers are filled by rain, but not on a yearly cycle, right? It could be a decade cycle or 100 or a century cycle for all we know. So Shmuel is of the opinion that a river is fed by its underground sources, not overground sources.
Is that true?
I don't know it probably depends on the river, but I don't really know.
Really?
This has
But-
halakhic implications.
It's humongous, and that's why the whole next stop is a short stop. So the
Oh.
halachic implications: can you go to a mikveh in a river? Right?
Exactly, yeah.
That's the huge implication, because if remember the general principle is, and again, not I don't know all the details, and the Ron does, but I don't. That you can, if it's raining, you can't go stand in the rain and say it's a mikvah, even if it's a lot of rain, right? Rainwater has to be mechunas, it has to be gathered in one spot. You can let it rain into a mikvah and then jump into that mikvah, but you can't stand in the rain and eat or flowing water that's from a rain, right? However, on the other hand, you can go into a mayan. No, you try to say mayan, a spring, or that spring. A mayan is where the water comes from underground. It's a natural source that you just jump into, and it's a mikvah, right? You don't have to collect it or do anything because the water comes from there. So the question is, if you go to a river, right? Is the water from underground, and then it's okay for a mikvah, or is the water from the rain, in which case it's not okay for a mikvah? And so the general principle, not the general, one of the principles is that if the water is rushing, right, then you have to worry that the water that's running is just rainwater, and that doesn't count.
Right, a runoff from snow melt, mostly.
Okay, right. That could be what rain means. That's very reasonable.
Usually.
So Shmuel made it sound like a river comes from underneath, but says the Gemara in the bottom line. But actually, Shmuel said something else about a mikvah that actually contradicts that. Pliga de Shmuel, meaning Shmuel said something that was contradictory. The Amar Shmuel, because Shmuel said, and this is his principle now, Ein hamayim mitaharim bezochalim, right? You're not allowed to, you don't become tahar if you go into water that's flowing, because you have to be worried that the majority of what you're going to go into, or part of what you're going to, is rainwater. Now, Shmuel just told us, right, that most of the river Prat comes from underneath, not from rainwater. So this seems to disagree with that. But Shmuel gave one exception. Shmuel's exception was Ella Prat biyume tishrei movad. The only exception, now the Ran goes through this in very, very, very great detail, as you can see, but he points out this doesn't mean just this time. But what Shmuel is saying is if you go to the river Prat in the time of Tishrei, so as everybody knows, I hope, if water that rains in Israel, right, it doesn't rain all summer. So it stops raining in Nisan and it doesn't rain until Tishrei.
It's the snow.
And so, but so at some point everything dries out. So the lowest point of the river is going to be Tishrei, right before the rains start, right? End of Tishrei, whatever. And so, of course, this has I should do my aside. I forgot to do this aside, right? It has big implications for tonight, right? Because the part of the reasons why we don't say V'tein tal umatar levracha until 60 days after Sukkot, it was a good segue. After Sukkot, is so that people can travel home so that the rains don't overwhelm the Prat, right? So because you have to believe that although it starts raining in Israel, you don't want it to rain too much towards Bavel so you can get home, right? So, but tonight's safe to say it. So Marav tonight you can say V'tein tal umatar.
Didn't take 60.
So that's the segue. But anyways, what Shmuel's halacha was that look at the Prat in Tishrei. That's the lowest level of the Prat in Tishrei. And the way the Ran understands it, he brings many opinions, but the way the Ran understands it is that the water level of Prat in Tishrei is known to be the river, right? And so as long as you go into the portion of the Prat that is full in Tishrei, you can go to the mikveh there. But then 3 months later, all the rains are coming and the river climbs by 10 feet, right? And then now the high water line is way up on the bank where all the boats used to be, right? So that part you can't go into as a mikveh, because that part is only there because of the rains. And so you can only rely on the part of the Prat that's visible or that's present in Tishrei. That's what Shmuel said, not the rest. And in fact, the final halacha is that Avua de Shmuel, Avid Lahon Mikvaot V'bante B'Yume Nisan. Seems like Avua de Shmuel, again, this seems like he disagreed with his son, and he made Mikvaot in the Prat even in Nisan, right? Which of course is the time where the river is almost the highest. It's right at the end of the winter season. Umafzi b'yumei Tishrei. But before I explain that one, but it seems that Avua de Shmuel is arguing, and so it turns out, again, the Ran brings many, many opinions about how to understand this, but that there is a machloket between Shmuel and Avua de Shmuel about whether or not you can go into the Prat as a mikvah during the time when a lot of the water seems to be from rainwater. And this is true about all rivers, right? And you can imagine a lot of European Jews lived on a river, right? So that had tremendous implication for where you could go to the mikvah, which rivers you could go, which part of the river.
It could be all the water from, I mean, as long
Also,
as,
but it depends on where in the river, right? So if the river is 20 feet in the end of the summer and 40 feet wide in the winter, you probably can't, you have to go into the middle in order for it to count as a mikvah, which is not very safe probably, right? So I think you have to be very careful. And there's a whole discussion, to be honest with you, about that sometimes they're makel, I think because it's sakana, right? Obviously there's danger in going into the middle of a river. But that was the halacha of Avua Dishmol. And the second thing that Avua Dishmol did was he would be maftzi b'yumei tishrei. When he sent them into the mikvah in Yumei, sorry, I said it wrong. I take it back. I said it completely wrong. Avua Dishmol did not disagree. He didn't say it's kosher to go in the river. Avua Dishmol said don't go in the river, and he made separate mikvaot for his daughters so they wouldn't have to go into the river, right? Because the river is not kosher in Yumei Nisa. Sorry, I said it all backwards. I'm glad I corrected that. So he's saying the same thing, that you're not allowed to go in the river as a mikvah during Nisan because it's very high, and it's only high because of the rainwater. The rainwater doesn't count. You can go in Tishrei, or you can go in a different season if you know you're going in the water that's there all the time. Now remember, the water's not there all the time, right? The water rushes, but the water level that's there all the time is kosher. And so in Tishrei, when they went into the mikvah, into the river, he would put mats down on the bottom of the river for them to walk onto. And the reason he did that is because it was very muddy, of course, right? Because it's the low area. And there's certain kinds of mud that are chatzitza when you go to the mikvah, right? Because if your feet are like stuck in the mud, you're not in the water completely. And so he would put down mats so that they weren't walking on the mud and their feet wouldn't get stuck. So that's what he did in Tishrei.
doesn't the river have to be at least certain depth for the?
Yeah, well, it doesn't have to. I mean, you could duck down, but you have to be covered, right? You don't have to stand in a mikvah, right? You can always do
No, I
something.
understand.
Okay, that's that halacha, which again is unrelated, but does take up our whole Amud Bet for that purpose. Let's read a few more lines because otherwise we'll be unsatisfied. Amar Rav Ami, Amar Rav, another halacha. We can go back to some of these halachot. This is really just Rav Ami, Amar Rav. Why does it say in Yecheskel? It says, Ata ben Adam. God says to Yecheskel, right? He calls him ben Adam all the time. Aseh lecha kli gola. Make yourself a kli gola, which could, I don't know how to translate gola, like an earthenware or kli, right? Some fashion. He doesn't translate it?
Steinsaltz says exile.
Well, I understand. We understand it to mean a kli of exile. The word gola means exile, but it's some functional thing. It was a parable, right? So he said to make a kli that you're going to take.
It says it's a lamp or a bowl.
Right. Well, that's the Gemara explains. So it says the Gemara, it says Rabbi Ami Amarav, Zu ner uke'ara ushatiyah. This is referring to three things. When you say what do we call clay gola? Your handbook for exile. You need a candle, you need a plate, and you need a shtiach, is like a mat, right? Something to rest on, a yoga mat. So you can do yoga. So no, I don't think that's exactly. Rashi says it's a placemat or a piece of leather that you can eat on. So, anyways, you have to bring your stuff with you, and that's the kli gola, that a person who's a traveler, like a camper. You have to bring your light, and you have to bring a plate, and you bring a mat to sit it on. The choser kol. Now, this says again, we're only quoting this because it's Rami Amarav. It has nothing to do, at least nothing direct, with our Gemara. But it says that, this is in the Tochacha, in Ki Tavo, right? It says you're going to be left with choser kol, missing everything. What does missing everything mean? Amar Ami Amarav, it means below ner, below shulchan. Being totally bereft means you have no light and you have no table. Those are the two things that you got nothing. How do you even live without those things? Rock bottom, thank you. Rav Chisda says it means below isha, it means you don't have a partner. Rav Sheshet says it means below shamash, not shemesh. You don't have a butler, right? I mean, God forbid, what are you gonna do? You're gonna make your own bath? Right? So that's what it means. Maybe they came from different social strata, I don't know. Rav Nachman Amar below de'ah. It means that it doesn't mean anything physical. It means you lose all intelligence, you lose all common sense. And that's what it means, choser kol. You lose all your money and your mind, right? Tana, there's a braita that says below melech, or below rava. That's like when you don't have any salt Ravav is some other, I forgot how you translate it, but Shemet, Rashi says like,
Greece,
oil. What, how do they translate?
Greece.
Grease, right, got it, right. So Ron says oil. So meaning you don't have any of the accoutrements you need to actually make food better. You're really bereft. Amr Abaya said, Naktinan, we have a understanding. Naktinan usually means you have a Kabbalah. Ein ani ela b'de'ah. That being poor is only in the mind. That a real poor person is someone who doesn't have their intelligence. They're not the actual physical possessions are not really the definition of a poor person. We're going to stop there, and tomorrow I pick up what they talked about in Marava about all this. Okay, interesting. I got it. Thank you all for joining.
Dr. Koch.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everyone. I'll see you all next week.
Shabbat tov.
Shavua tov.
Tov.